let you touch my piano? Get out!
Who let that old blind janitor touch my piano? The words cut through the ballroom like a knife dragged across glass. Samuel Carter stood beside the Steinway, one hand hovering over the polished black lid, the other wrapped around his white cane. Around him, waiters froze. A woman in pearls stopped mid-sip. Somewhere near the back, a fork slipped from someone's hand and struck a plate with a sharp, lonely sound. Charles Whitaker stared at him from the edge of the stage. His tuxedo was perfect. His smile was not. "I asked you a question," Charles said. "Who let him in here?" Samuel did not answer right away. He turned his face toward the voice, not toward the man's face. He could not see that anymore. He had not seen a face clearly in almost 18 years. But he heard everything. The breath behind the insult, the pleasure inside the cruelty, the silence of everyone who could have spoken but did not. "Sir," Samuel said softly, "I only wanted to play one song." A few guests laughed, not loudly, just enough. Charles stepped closer, his shoes clicked against the marble, slow, clean, expensive. "You wanted to play," he said. "You hear that, everyone? The cleaning man wants to perform. More laughter now." Samuel's fingers tightened around his cane. To most people in that room, he was nothing more than a tired old man in a gray uniform, 62 years old, blind, quiet, paid to empty trash and polish brass handles no one noticed. But 12 hours earlier, before the humiliation, before the Steinway, before the room learned what shame sounded like, Samuel Carter had woken up alone in his small apartment in Southeast Washington. The radiator knocked twice, hissed once, then fell quiet. He knew that rhythm by heart. He reached for the edge of the bed, sat up slowly, and waited for his knees to forgive him. The room smelled like instant coffee, old wood, and the lavender soap his late wife, Margaret, used to buy in bulk because it was cheaper that way. 14 steps to the kitchen. He counted them every morning. One hand along the wall, fingers over cracked paint, past the narrow doorway, around the small table with the loose leg, stopped before the counter. He found the coffee jar by touch. Second shelf, right side, behind the salt. Margaret had labeled it in Braille before cancer took her. She had labeled everything. The cans, the drawers, the medicine bottles, even the fuse box. She had been building him a map for a life she knew she would not get to share. Samuel poured hot water into a chipped mug and stood still while the apartment breathed around him. Above the table sat a framed photograph he had not truly seen in years, but every morning he touched the glass. A younger Samuel, a black tuxedo, a grand piano behind him, a president of the United States shaking his hand. Not one president, not two, three. 3 different men had risen to their feet for Samuel Carter. And now, in a ballroom full of power, money, and polished manners, a billionaire was calling him a janitor, like it was the lowest thing a man could be. Samuel lowered his hand from the Steinway. His voice stayed calm. "Yes, sir," he said. "I clean floors." Then his fingers found the edge of the bench. But these hands remember more than marble. The room heard him. Not the way people hear a man asking for mercy. They heard him the way people hear a door lock from the wrong side. Charles Whitaker blinked once. His smile tightened. He did not like calm. Calm made insults feel smaller. Calm made a cruel man work harder. "What did you say?" Samuel stood beside the bench, his left hand resting lightly on the wood. He could feel the old polish under his palm, smooth, warm from the stage lights. The Steinway breathed beside him like something alive. "I said these hands remember more than marble." A waiter near the service doors looked down at Samuel's hands. Dark skin, cracked knuckles, a small scar across one thumb. Hands that had held mop handles, trash bags, elevator rails, and once, long ago, concert halls. Charles gave a short laugh, a laugh with no joy in it. "Well, isn't that poetic?" He turned toward the crowd, spreading one hand like a man inviting them into his joke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "it seems our janitor has brought us a speech." A few people smiled because they were afraid not to. A few looked away because they were ashamed and did not yet want to admit it. At table 4, Lillian Brooks watched without moving. 77 years old, silver hair pinned close, black dress, pearl earrings. A woman who had spent her life at pianos in halls where presidents sat straight and critics held their breath. her fingers pressed against the stem of her water glass. She knew something was wrong with this scene. Not just the cruelty, the posture. The way Samuel stood near the instrument. He did not stand like a man curious about a piano. He stood like a man returning to a room that once belonged to him. Near the back wall, Marcus Bennett had stopped carrying a tray of champagne. He saw Samuel's face and felt his stomach turn. "No," he whispered. A young server beside him glanced over. "You know him?" Marcus did not answer. He was remembering a night 2 years earlier. 2 in the morning. Staff break room. Fluorescent lights buzzing. Samuel at an old upright piano with chipped keys. The music had filled that ugly little room until Marcus forgot where he was. Now Charles stepped closer. "You want to prove something, Samuel?" The way he said the name made it sound like he had just read it off a cleaning schedule. Samuel tilted his head. "No, sir. Then what do you want?" For a second, the room seemed to lean toward him. Samuel's throat moved. His answer came quietly. "To finish what I started." That sentence landed harder than anyone expected, because it did not sound like pride. It sounded like grief. Charles heard the shift in the room. He felt it before he understood it. His jaw tightened. Men like Charles were experts at owning spaces. He knew when a room belonged to him, and for the first time that evening, this one had begun to slip. He stepped in close enough that Samuel could smell his cologne. "Listen to me," Charles said under his breath. "You touch that piano again, and you will not have a job tomorrow." Samuel's finger curled once against the bench. There it was. The old bargain. Your dignity or your paycheck. Your silence or your rent. Your humanity or your place. Samuel thought of the final notice on his kitchen counter. He thought of the little apartment with the clicking radiator. He thought of Margaret's ring, already gone to a pawn shop 4 months earlier. He thought of how many times a man can shrink himself and still be expected to call it survival. Then he heard Marcus from the service doorway. "Mr. Carter." 2 words, not loud, not dramatic, but Samuel heard the fear in them and the love. Charles turned sharply. "Who said that?" Marcus froze. The tray trembled in his hand. Champagne shivered inside every glass. Nobody moved. Nobody helped him. Samuel lifted his face toward Marcus's voice. "It is all right, Marcus." Marcus swallowed hard. His eyes were wet. His hands were too big for the delicate tray, but he held it like a shield. "No, sir," Marcus said. "It is not." That was the first honest thing anyone in the ballroom had said all night. A murmur rolled across the tables. Charles heard it. Lillian Brooks stood. Slowly. Her chair moved back with a soft scrape that sounded louder than it should have. Charles looked at her, surprised. "Lillian, please. This is being handled." She did not look at him. She looked at Samuel. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice thin but steady. "Do you need help finding the bench?" Charles went pale with anger. "Absolutely not." Samuel did not answer right away. He stood in the center of all that polished wealth, one blind man in a janitor's uniform, surrounded by people who had mistaken silence for good manners. Then he reached out. Lillian stepped forward. Marcus set down the tray and moved too. Together they guided Samuel back to the bench. The crowd watched. Charles watched. His mouth opened. No sound came. Samuel sat. His knees ached. His breathing slowed. His hands hovered above the keys. And in the stillness before the first note, every powerful person in that room had to face a simple truth. They had not stopped the cruelty. They had only waited to see whether it would become entertaining. The first note did not sound like courage. It sounded like a man asking permission from his own past. Soft, uneven, almost afraid. Samuel's right hand touched the keys with care, and the opening phrase of Chopin moved into the ballroom like a candle flame in a draft. It was beautiful, but fragile. Too fragile. The kind of sound that made people lean in, not because they were moved, but because they were waiting for it to break. Charles Whitaker folded his arms. "There it is," he muttered. "This is exactly what I expected." A man near the front gave a nervous smile. His wife did not. She stared at Samuel's hands. Her face had changed. Something in those fingers looked familiar, even if she could not name it. Samuel heard the whisper. He heard the chair creak. He heard a server's breath catch near the wall. He heard Charles shift his weight, pleased with himself. For a moment, the weight of the room pressed down on him. 400 people, crystal glasses, silk dresses, political donors, lawyers, judges. Men who moved money with one phone call. Women who sat on boards and smiled through cruelty because they had learned survival in rooms just like this one. And Samuel, in a gray uniform, sat under the light with his hands trembling. Then his left hand missed the bass note. Not badly, but enough. A small wrong sound opened in the music. Charles exhaled through his nose. He almost laughed. Samuel stopped. The note faded. Silence fell so hard it seemed to flatten the air. Marcus closed his eyes at the service door. Lillian Brooks stood beside the stage, one hand pressed against her chest. She had heard the mistake, but she had also heard what came before it. Training, real training, not hobby playing, not church basement memory. A serious hand, a hand that had lived with music. Charles took one step forward. "All right," he said, "that is enough." Samuel did not move. His hands hovered over the keys. Inside of him, something old was breaking open. He was not in the ballroom anymore. Not fully. He was back in a hospital room, where Margaret's skin had become thin as paper, and her voice still tried to sound cheerful. He remembered her hand around his. He remembered her saying, "Sam, promise me you will not let the dark take the music too." He had promised. Then he had broken that promise for 15 years. Not all at once. That was the cruel part. A man does not disappear in a single day. He disappears in small agreements. One canceled performance. One unanswered call. One morning when he tells himself the world has moved on. One night when the piano in the staff room feels like enough. Samuel drew one breath, then another. His shoulders settled. His spine straightened. His fingers lowered. This time, the sound changed. The room felt it before it understood it. The same Chopin returned, but not as a question. As an answer. The bass line rolled out deep and controlled. His right hand lifted the melody with sudden clarity, clean as winter light on the Potomac. The fragile candle became a fire behind glass. Contained, hot, impossible to ignore. A woman at table 6 whispered, "Oh my Lord." No one laughed now. Charles's arms loosened, his mouth closed. Samuel played through the first rise with power held under discipline. Nothing showy, nothing cheap, no tricks for applause. Every note had weight, every pause had purpose. The room began to understand that they were not watching a lucky accident. They were watching a life return to its body. Lillian took a step closer to the stage. Her eyes filled, but she did not wipe them. Marcus forgot the tray behind him. He forgot his job. He forgot the rules about staff standing still near paying guests. He only watched his friend become somebody the world should never have lost. Then Samuel shifted, not away from Chopin, through it. A thin thread of Gershwin slid into the phrase, quiet at first, then bolder. The rhythm bent. The room changed color. Classical sorrow met American restlessness. Old grief met city streets. The music moved like traffic at dusk, like rain on windows, like a man walking home after losing everything and still refusing to hate the world. The young cellist Charles had dismissed earlier sat forward so fast her chair scraped the floor. She knew. She knew exactly how difficult that transition was. She covered her mouth. "No," she whispered. "No way." But Samuel was already past proving anything. His hands crossed, fell, rose, drove. The Steinway opened under him. It did not sound like Charles Whittaker's piano anymore. It sounded like Samuel Carter's witness stand. And every person in that ballroom had just been called to testify. Charles Whittaker backed away from the stage as if the music had reached out and touched him. Not pushed him, not struck him, just touched him in a place money had never protected. His wife, Evelyn, watched from the front table with both hands folded around her clutch. For 26 years, she had learned the small rules of his world. Smile when he smiled. Look down when he corrected a waiter. Say nothing when he turned cruelty into dinner conversation. Tonight, for the first time in years, she did not look down. She looked at Samuel. And she listened. The Gershwin faded slowly, one blue note bending into another until the ballroom seemed to breathe with it. Then Samuel paused. Not a full stop, a held breath. His hands rested on the keys and the silence became part of the performance. No one moved, not even Charles. Then Samuel played a single middle C plain bare, almost too simple. A second note followed. Then a third. A small melody stepped into the room like someone entering a house after a funeral. Lillian Brooks covered her mouth. She did not know the piece. That told her everything. This was not Chopin, not Gershwin, not anything borrowed from the dead masters. This was Samuel. His own hand, his own wound, his own testimony. The melody returned again, softer, warmer. It curved upward, then fell back like laughter remembered from another room. Samuel saw Margaret then, not with his eyes, but with the part of memory blindness had never reached. She was 49, standing barefoot in their old kitchen, stirring soup with one hand, snapping her fingers with the other, because a song had come on the radio. She had laughed when he tried to dance with her, between the stove and the sink. Sam, she had said, you have played for presidents, but you still cannot find the beat in your own kitchen. He had pretended to be offended. She had kissed his cheek. The piano held that kiss now. It held the kitchen, the soup, the worn floor, the cheap curtains, the ordinary life that had been more sacred than any concert hall. A woman near the back began to cry quietly. Her husband reached for her hand, then stopped, unsure if comfort was something he had earned. After a moment, she took his hand herself. The music darkened, not suddenly, like clouds moving over a city. The harmony shifted, a chord bent wrong, another pressed harder, the sweetness tightened into fear. Samuel's left hand moved lower on the keyboard. The sound became the hospital hallway, the plastic chair, the doctor's careful voice. The word cancer spoken gently, as if gentleness could make it less cruel. Evelyn Whitaker lowered her eyes now, but not in obedience, in recognition. She remembered sitting beside her own sister during chemotherapy in Baltimore. She remembered the smell of antiseptic, the way families whispered in waiting rooms because loud hope felt disrespectful. Samuel's hands grew stronger. The notes struck deeper. This was not performance anymore. This was a man opening a locked room and forcing the whole ballroom to stand inside it. The melody cracked, rebuilt, cracked again. Charles turned toward his assistant, Grant, who stood frozen near the curtain. "Do something," Charles whispered. Grant did not move. Charles's eyes sharpened. "I said do something." Grant swallowed. His gaze went from Samuel to Lillian, to the hundreds of guests leaning forward in complete silence. He had spent 6 saying yes to Charles Whitaker, yes to the temper, yes to the pressure, yes to the quiet humiliations of people who could not answer back. But now his hand would not lift, his feet would not move. "No, sir," he said. Charles stared at him. "What?" Grant's voice shook, but it came out clear. "I am not stopping him." The words cut through the room without interrupting the music. Charles went still. For one sharp second, all his power had nowhere to go. Then Samuel's left hand crashed into the low register. Thunder, controlled, heavy, clean. The chandelier trembled above him. Glass hummed. Silverware shivered on linen. The sound was anger, but not wild anger. It was the anger of every man who had been spoken down to and kept his hands steady. Every woman who had smiled through insult to keep a job. Every worker who had worn a name tag while someone with money pretended names did not matter. Marcus stood at the service door with tears on his face. He did not wipe them. Not this time. The young cellist rose from her chair, slowly, like the music had lifted her by the spine, and across the ballroom, one by one, people began to understand. Samuel Carter had not come to entertain them. He had come back from the dead place where the world had put him. The thunder did not fade. It traveled, across the linen tables, through the crystal stems, into the hands of people who had spent years confusing comfort with goodness. Samuel's fingers struck the lower keys again, then again. Each chord landed like a gavel, not loud for the sake of being loud. True. That was what frightened Charles most. Truth has a different sound when it stops asking permission. Evelyn sat very still at the front table. Her diamond bracelet caught the light every time her hand trembled. She looked at her husband, then at Grant, then at Marcus near the service door. Marcus was no longer hiding. He stood in full view of the guests, broad shoulders squared, jaw tight, eyes wet. A tray sat on the floor beside him, forgotten. Champagne cooling in glasses no one wanted anymore. A hotel manager named Denise Rowland hurried in from the side hall. She was 46, neat, suit, clipped badge, the kind of woman who knew how to fix emergencies without leaving fingerprints. She had been called because there was a disturbance in the ballroom. Then she saw Samuel at the piano. She stopped so quickly the young coordinator behind her almost ran into her back. Denise knew Samuel, not well, not the way a person should know someone who had worked under the same roof for 9 years. She knew he was punctual, quiet, blind, never complained, always said good evening, even when guests walked through him like smoke. And now he was playing a piece that made the richest room in Washington feel morally poor. The coordinator whispered, "Should we cut the sound?" Denise looked at the stage. Then she looked at Charles. He was staring at her with the cold panic of a man expecting obedience. Denise felt that look. She had spent her career feeling looks like that, from guests, owners, donors, men who never raised their voices because they did not have to. Her hand moved toward the radio at her waist, then stopped. "No," Denise said. The coordinator blinked. "No?" That was all. 2 letters. A whole life-changing direction. Samuel's music softened just enough to draw the room closer. The anger did not vanish. It became memory. The low notes thinned. The right hand began to sing again, the Margaret theme returning through the wreckage. A melody with bruises. A melody that had survived. At table 12, an older man removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with a napkin. His wife stared at him. In 43 years of marriage, she had seen him cry at only 2 funerals. He shook his head once, as if apologizing for all the years he had held back tenderness, because he thought it made him weak. The young cellist, whose name was Rachel Moore, stood near the aisle now. 23 years old, first major gala, first time playing for people who could open doors. She had spent the whole evening shrinking herself after Charles ignored her hand and called her less than real entertainment. But as Samuel played, Rachel felt something inside her lift. Not confidence. Permission. She reached for the cello case beside her chair. Her fingers moved before her fear could stop them. Her aunt, sitting next to her, whispered, "Rachel, what are you doing?" Rachel did not look away from Samuel. "Listening," she said. Then she took out her cello. The sound of the latches clicking open carried through the room. Charles snapped toward her. "Do not even think about it." Rachel froze. Everyone saw it, the old reflex. A young black woman stopped by the voice of a powerful white man in a room full of donors. For 1 second, fear won. Then Lillian Brooks turned her head. "Play," she said. Quiet, firm. "Enough." Rachel lifted the cello from its case. Her bow hand shook so badly, the wood tapped softly against the strings. She swallowed, raised the instrument, and waited. Samuel heard the cello breathe before it spoke. A small smile moved across his face. He shifted the harmony. Open space, invited her in. Rachel entered on one long, low note, soft as a hand on a shoulder. Not perfect, real. The cello wrapped around Samuel's melody, and something in the ballroom changed again. This was no longer one man reclaiming himself. It was becoming bigger, a witness, a warning, a healing. Marcus pressed both hands to his mouth. Denise closed her eyes. Evelyn's tears slipped before she could stop them. Charles stood alone near the stage, surrounded by people, abandoned by the obedience he had mistaken for respect. Samuel and Rachel played together now. Piano and cello. Grief and answer, darkness and breath. The final movement rose beneath their hands. Not fast, not flashy, stronger than that. It rose like people standing up after years of being told to sit down. One guest stood, then another, then a third, not clapping yet, just standing. Charles looked around. "No," he whispered. But the room was already leaving him. The first applause came too early. One sharp clap from somewhere near the back. Then another. Then silence swallowed them both, because Samuel and Rachel were not finished. Lillian Brooks raised one hand without looking away from the stage. "Wait," she whispered. And somehow the room obeyed. Samuel's final movement kept rising, not in volume alone, but in pressure. It moved under the skin. It pulled old memories out of people who had spent decades burying them under busy schedules, polite phrases, and money. Rachel's cello trembled beneath her chin. Her eyes were wet, but her bow stayed steady now. She had found the line. Samuel gave it to her, and she followed. Not as a student, not as a charity case, as a musician. That mattered. Everyone in the room could feel it. For Rachel, it felt like a door opening from the inside. Charles saw it too. He saw the guests standing. He saw phones lifting. He saw Senator Grace Monroe pull off her reading glasses and stare at Samuel like a woman trying to place a face from history. He saw Evelyn standing now, several feet away from him, no longer behind his shoulder. Charles turned toward Denise Rowland. "End this," he said. Denise did not move. He stepped closer. His voice lowered. "I fund this hotel's arts program. I sit on your advisory board. I can make one call." Denise looked at him then. For years, she had measured her words around men like him. She had taught herself to smile with her jaw locked. She had learned that professionalism often meant absorbing disrespect and calling it patience. But tonight, the sound from that piano made patience feel like another name for fear. She kept her voice calm. "Mr. Whitaker, this is a private event in a hotel ballroom, not your personal property. And that man is not a disturbance." Charles's face hardened. "He is an employee." "Yes," Denise said. "He is." Her eyes did not leave his. "And he is a person." The sentence was simple. That was why it cut. Charles opened his mouth, but the music struck again. Samuel's left hand rolled through the bass with a deep, steady force. Rachel answered with a long note that seemed to hold the whole room upright. The melody returned, brighter now. Margaret's theme. The same little phrase from the kitchen, the soup, the laugh, the kiss on the cheek, but changed, not healed. Healing. There is a difference. Healing does not erase the wound. It teaches the body that the wound is not the whole story. Samuel knew that now, not as an idea, as sound, as breath, as the weight of ivory beneath his fingers. He thought of Margaret labeling the coffee jar, her hand guiding his over each braille mark, her voice saying, "You will still know where things are, Sam. We will make new maps." He had hated those labels at first. They felt like surrender. But they were love. Love had been teaching him how to live in the dark before he was brave enough to admit the dark was coming. His hands softened. The room softened with him. An older waitress named Carla stood near the kitchen doors, holding a stack of folded napkins against her chest. She had worked banquets for 31 years. She had seen senators drunk, CEOs cruel, brides sobbing in service hallways, and wealthy men snap their fingers like she was a dog. She had trained herself not to feel. But Samuel's music broke that training. A tear slipped down her cheek. Marcus saw it. "You all right, Miss Carla?" She gave a small, broken laugh. "No, baby," she said. "But maybe that is a good thing." Then the final passage began. Samuel's hands moved with a calm that frightened and steadied the room at the same time. No more hesitation, no more proving. He had crossed some invisible line. The blind janitor the room had mocked was gone. In his place sat the artist who had never needed their permission. Rachel followed him into the last climb. Her cello rose higher than before, not loud but clear. Samuel gave her space. She took it. The final chord built beneath them. Piano, cello, grief, witness, mercy. The sound filled the ballroom until it seemed the walls themselves had leaned inward to listen. Then Samuel pulled back. One note, then another. Then only Rachel, holding the final tone like a candle cupped against wind. She released it. Silence. 5 seconds. 10. No one clapped, no one breathed. Then Lillian Brooks stood all the way upright. Her hands came together once, then again, slow, certain, sacred. Senator Monroe stood next, then Evelyn, then Marcus, then Carla, then the entire ballroom rose like a verdict. The applause did not explode all at once. It grew. First like rain on a roof, then like a storm. Hands struck hands. Chairs scraped back. People stood so fast napkins slid to the floor. A glass tipped over near table 9 and spilled wine across white linen, but no one reached for it. No one cared. Samuel sat still at the piano bench. His hands rested in his lap. He could not see the standing ovation, but he felt it. The vibration through the stage. The warmth of bodies rising. The breath of hundreds of people who had just remembered they were human before they were important. Rachel stood beside him with her cello at her side. Her bow hand shook now that the music was gone. She looked smaller without the sound around her, but not weak. Never again weak. Lillian Brooks climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Slowly. Her knees were not young, and everyone knew not to offer help unless she asked. She reached Samuel and stopped in front of him. "Mr. Carter," she said. Samuel turned toward her voice. "Mom." Lillian swallowed. Her face tightened as if she were holding back something too large for the room. "I have heard great pianists for more than 60 years, she said. "I have played with some of them. I have buried some of them. And I need you to understand something." The room quieted around her. That was not a performance by a janitor. Her voice broke. That was a performance by a master. The applause rose again, harder this time. Rachel covered her mouth. Marcus bent forward, both hands on his knees, trying to breathe through what he was feeling. Charles stood near the stage like a man trapped in public daylight. Then Senator Grace Monroe moved. She was 68, sharp-eyed, with silver haircut just below her jaw. She had spent 3 decades in Washington, learning when a room needed a speech and when it needed the truth. Tonight, it needed both. She walked to the microphone near the podium. No one stopped her. Charles saw her hand close around it. "Senator," he said quickly, "this is a private foundation event." Grace turned her head. "Charles, sit down." 2 words. Flat final. The room went still. Charles did not sit, but he also did not speak again. Grace faced the crowd. "I know this man," she said. A murmur moved through the ballroom. Samuel's head lowered slightly. Not in shame, in recognition of a door opening that he had kept closed for years. Grace continued. "His name is Samuel Carter. He is not simply an employee of this hotel. He is a graduate of the Thornton Conservatory. He performed at 3 White House state dinners. He played at a memorial service for Justice Raymond Cole. He performed in Geneva for an international peace summit. And once, in the East Room, I watched a president stand up before the final note had faded." Charles stared at Samuel. His face changed, not softened, changed. The insult was still in the room. The shove, the laughter, the way he had made cruelty sound casual. But now it had a witness it could not survive. Grace's voice sharpened. "The man our host mocked tonight has brought more honor to American music than most people in this room have brought to anything they put their names on." No one breathed. "And the worst part is this," she said. "He should not have needed a resume to be treated with dignity." That sentence hit harder than the reveal, because it did not let anyone hide behind surprise. At table 11, a man who had laughed earlier looked down at his hands. His wife slid her chair a few inches away from him. Small movement, huge meaning. Charles stepped toward the stage. "Samuel," he said, forcing a careful smile. "I did not know." Samuel did not move. Charles tried again. "If I had known who you were, of course I would never—" Samuel lifted one hand. The room stopped with him. Charles fell silent. Samuel turned his face toward the sound of Charles's breathing. "You did not need to know who I was," he said. His voice was quiet. Everyone heard it. "You needed to know who you are." The words entered the room like a clean blade. Charles's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Evelyn closed her eyes. One tear slid down her cheek, but her face looked freer than it had all night. Rachel stepped closer to Samuel and set her hand gently on the edge of the piano. Marcus came up behind him, not touching, just near enough to help if needed. And in that moment, power shifted, not from Charles to Samuel, from fear to truth, from status to character, from silence to witness. The ballroom rose again, louder than before, and this time the applause was not only for the music. It was for the man, and against it what had been done to him. Charles Whitaker heard the applause and knew it was no longer something he could control. It rolled over him from every direction, not polite, not useful, not the kind of applause a donor receives when his name is printed on a program. This was different. This had judgment inside it. He looked toward the exit. For the first time that night, Charles wanted out of his own room, but cameras were up now, phones in every row, red recording lights. Small screens catching his face from angles he could not command. He saw himself inside them, pale and stiff, standing 10 feet from a blind man he had tried to humiliate. That was when fear finally reached him. Not guilt, fear. There is a difference. Guilt asks, "What have I done?" Fear asks, "Who saw me do it?" Evelyn knew the difference. She had lived beside it for more than 2 decades. She watched her husband smooth his jacket, lift his chin, and prepare to turn disgrace into management. He stepped toward Samuel again. Mr. Carter, Charles said, louder this time for the room, I owe you an apology. Samuel remained seated. Marcus moved half a step closer, protective without touching him. Charles forced his voice into warmth. What happened here tonight was unfortunate. Emotions were high. This event means a great deal to me, to the foundation, to the arts community, and I reacted poorly. Senator Grace Monroe stared at him from the podium. Lillian Brooks looked down at the floor for a moment, as if embarrassed by the shape of the words. Unfortunate. Reacted poorly. The language of men who want forgiveness without confession. Rachel tightened her hand around her bow. Samuel lifted his face. Did you react poorly, Mr. Whitaker? The room fell quiet again. Charles blinked. I beg your pardon? Samuel's voice stayed soft. Did you react poorly? Or did you say what you believed when you thought it would cost you nothing? No one moved. A guest near the center lowered his phone, then raised it again. Charles's smile began to crack. That is not fair. Samuel nodded once. No, he said. It was not. The answer turned the room colder. Evelyn closed her eyes. She had heard Charles use the word fair all his life. Fair when employees complained. Fair when reporters asked questions. Fair when a waiter made one mistake after standing on his feet for 12 hours. To Charles, fair had always meant anything that protected him from consequence. But tonight, the word did not obey him. Denise Rowland stepped forward from the side of the stage. Her voice was professional, but her hands were shaking. Mr. Carter, she said, on behalf of the Harrington Grand, I want to apologize. Not for the music. For what happened before it. You deserve protection in this room. We failed you. Samuel turned toward her. Thank you, Miss Rowland. Denise swallowed hard. That simple courtesy nearly broke her. Charles shot her a look. She did not look away. Then Grant, his assistant, did something no one expected. He walked to the microphone that Senator Monroe had left near the podium. He was thin, nervous, not built for confrontation. His hand trembled so hard the microphone clicked against the stand. Charles whispered Grant, "Do not." Grant looked at him, really looked at him. For 6 years, Grant had carried bags, managed schedules, softened insults, fixed damage and called it loyalty. But loyalty to cruelty hollows a person out. Tonight, he could feel the empty place inside him. He turned to the room. My name is Grant Ellis, he said. I work for Mr. Whitaker. I heard what he said to Mr. Carter before the performance. I saw him put his hands on him. I did not stop it. His voice broke. I should have. The ballroom went silent in a new way, not shocked, accountable. Grant breathed in once sharp. I am sorry, Mr. Carter. Samuel bowed his head slightly. Thank you for telling the truth. That sentence did something to Grant. His shoulders dropped. He looked younger and older at the same time. Charles stared at him like betrayal had taken human form. But the room was gone, completely gone. People no longer watched Charles for permission. They watched Samuel. They watched Denise. They watched Grant. They watched one another, measuring the cost of their own silence. Evelyn stood and picked up her clutch. Charles turned toward her. Where are you going? She looked at him for a long moment. Her face was wet but steady. Home, Charles. Then, after a pause, she added something so quiet only the front tables heard it. But not with you. She walked past him, 3 steps ahead. Not behind. Charles did not follow. For the first time in his life, the room did not rearrange itself around him. It let him stand there, alone. Samuel did not leave the stage when Charles finally walked away. He stayed seated at the Steinway, his hands quiet in his lap, while the room moved around him like a tide that had forgotten where the shore was. People wanted to come close now. That was human, too. Some came because they were moved. Some came because they were ashamed. Some came because they had been in the room when cruelty happened. And standing near, Samuel felt like a way to borrow forgiveness without asking for it. Samuel knew the difference. Blindness had sharpened other senses, yes. But life had sharpened something deeper. He could hear sincerity in a pause. He could hear performance in a polished apology. A man from Table 7 approached first, expensive suit, soft hands, voice trembling just enough to be useful. Mr. Carter, I just want to say what happened tonight was terrible. Truly terrible. I hope you know not all of us. Samuel turned his head toward him. Did you laugh? The man stopped. His breath caught. Samuel waited. The man looked at the floor. His wife stood behind him, eyes fixed on the back of his neck. Yes, the man whispered at first. I did. Samuel nodded once. Then remember that. The man looked up, startled. Not to punish yourself, Samuel said. To interrupt yourself next time. The words were quiet, but people nearby heard them. They spread through the front rows without being repeated. To interrupt yourself. That was the lesson nobody had expected. Not shame as a grave. Shame as a doorway. Rachel stood at the edge of the stage with her cello case open at her feet. Young musicians came toward her now. A clarinetist, a violin student, a choir director from Maryland. They spoke in low voices, not the loud networking voice of the earlier evening. You were brave, one woman said. Rachel shook her head. No, she said. I was scared. I just played anyway. Lillian Brooks heard that and smiled. That is most of bravery, child. Marcus stood close to Samuel, still in uniform. Every few seconds, someone tried to thank him too, as if they had just realized the service staff were not furniture. Marcus accepted each word politely, but his eyes kept going back to Samuel. You need water, Mr. Carter? I need you to stop calling me Mr. Carter like I am your school principal. Marcus let out a laugh that broke halfway into a sob. Man, do not do that to me right now. Samuel smiled. There he is. For a moment, the two men were not inside a gala anymore. They were back in the staff break room. Bad vending machine. Cheap coffee. Two men surviving the same building from different corners. Denise Rowland approached with a hotel security supervisor beside her. The supervisor was a tall man named Paul Reeves, retired D.C. police, calm face, careful eyes. He held Samuel's white cane in both hands. Mr. Carter, Paul said, I believe this is yours. Samuel reached out. Paul placed the cane across his palms as gently as if he were handing back something sacred. I should have stepped in earlier, Paul said. Samuel's fingers closed around the cane. Were you in the room? Near the east doors. Then yes, Samuel said. Paul swallowed. Yes, sir. Denise looked at her shoes, then forced herself to look at Samuel. The hotel will review everything. The physical contact, the language, the staff response. All of it. Samuel listened. He had heard sentences like that before. Review, process, appropriate action. Words designed to cool hot truth until it could be filed away. Denise seemed to know it. She took a breath. And tomorrow morning, she said, every employee in this building will be told what happened, not a version that protects a donor, the truth. Samuel turned toward her more fully. That matters, he said. Denise nodded, and this time her voice cracked. It should have mattered before tonight. Across the ballroom, Evelyn stood near the side exit with her coat over one arm. Charles was gone. His name still appeared on banners, programs, and a brass plate on the piano, but the man himself had become smaller than all of them. Evelyn walked back to the stage. The room watched her. She stopped several feet from Samuel. Mr. Carter, she said. Her voice was careful, not polished. Careful. I spent years pretending silence was not agreement. Samuel said nothing. Evelyn's lips trembled. Tonight I learned it is. No one rescued her from the sentence. That was the mercy of the moment. She had to carry it herself. Samuel turned his face toward her. Then carry something better tomorrow. Evelyn pressed one hand to her chest. I will try. Samuel shook his head gently. Do not try. Practice. That word landed softly. Practice. The thing every musician understood. The thing every decent life required. By then, Senator Monroe had returned to the microphone. She did not ask for attention. She waited until the room gave it. Tonight, she said, we were shown something painful and something beautiful. The painful part is that a man had to prove his greatness before some people remembered his humanity. Her eyes moved across the room. The beautiful part is that he reminded us anyway. Samuel lowered his head. Not from defeat, from weight. Because being seen can hurt too, when you have spent years surviving invisibility. By midnight, the ballroom was almost empty. But the silence left behind was not empty at all. It carried everything. The applause, the music, the shame, the truth. Hotel staff moved through the room slowly, gathering glasses and folding napkins. No one joked, no one rushed. Even the silverware seemed quieter when it touched the trays. Samuel sat in a small service office behind the ballroom with Marcus beside him. Denise Rowland had brought him tea in a paper cup. She had offered a car home. Samuel had said no at first. Habit. Pride. The old training of a man who had learned not to need too much from people. Marcus leaned back in the chair and looked at him. "Man, take the ride." Samuel turned his face toward him. "You always this bossy? Only when you are being stubborn." Samuel smiled, tired but real. "All right." Across the hotel, Charles Whitaker's name was already coming down. Not from every wall. Not yet, but from the Steinway. Paul Reeves, the security supervisor, stood beside the piano with a small screwdriver in his hand. Denise watched from a few feet away. The brass plate was fixed to the side of the instrument. "Charles Whitaker, patron of the arts." Paul looked at Denise. "You sure?" Denise folded her arms. "I am." The screws turned. Slow. Careful. The plate came loose. No speech, no ceremony, just metal leaving wood. Sometimes justice starts quietly. Outside, Evelyn Whitaker sat alone in the back of a black town car. She had told the driver to take the long way home. Her phone kept lighting up with Charles's name. She did not answer. She looked out at Washington at night, the monuments pale against the dark, and for the first time in years, she let herself feel the size of what silence had cost her. In another car, Rachel Moore held her cello case across her lap like it was a sleeping child. Her aunt kept wiping her eyes with the same tissue until it fell apart. "You played tonight, baby," her aunt said. Rachel nodded. "I almost did not, but you did." Rachel looked down at her hands, because he made room. That was the truth she would carry for the rest of her life. Greatness is not only what a person does alone. Sometimes greatness is the space they create for someone else to stand. The next morning, Samuel woke at 5:15. The radiator knocked twice, hissed once, then paused. Same sound, same room, same cracked wall beside the bed. But he was not the same man who had left that apartment the day before. He sat up slowly. His knees ached, his hands ached too. Good ache, honest ache. The kind that comes after labor that matters. On the kitchen counter, the final rent notice still waited. The coffee jar still sat on the second shelf, right side, behind the salt. Margaret's photograph still stood above the table. Samuel touched the frame. "Morning, Maggie," he whispered. His phone rang before the coffee finished cooling. Marcus had insisted he keep the new number saved where he could find it. Samuel answered on the second ring. "Mr. Carter," a woman said. "This is Lillian Brooks." Samuel stood very still. "Mom." "No," she said gently. "Not Mom, Lillian." He smiled a little. "All right, Lillian." "I made 3 calls this morning," she said. "One to the Kennedy Center, one to an old recording producer who owes me a favor, and one to Senator Monroe. If you are willing, we would like to help you play again." Samuel did not answer, not because he lacked words, because too many came at once. Margaret, the White House, the darkness, the mop, the years, the room, the song. Lillian waited. She understood silence better than most people. Finally, Samuel said, "I have one condition. Name it." There are young musicians who get overlooked before anyone hears them. Kids without the right money, the right face, the right story. I want a fund for them. In my wife's name. Lillian's voice softened. "Then that is where we begin." Samuel lowered himself into the kitchen chair. The coffee had gone cold. He did not care. For the first time in 15 years, the future did not sound like an empty hallway. It sounded like a door opening. He placed his hands flat on the table, the same hands that had cleaned floors, the same hands that had played for presidents, the same hands Charles Whitaker had called dirty. Samuel smiled. Clean hands are not hands that never touch hardship. Clean hands are hands that refuse to pass cruelty on. And if this story moved something in you, like this video so more people can hear it. Subscribe for more stories about dignity, courage, and the people the world should never overlook. And in the comments, leave these 3 words: never stay silent.